What if the smallest act of kindness could break a lifetime of darkness and set an entire world trembling toward the light? This is the first quiet miracle at the heart of Les Misérables, Victor Hugo's sweeping and unruly masterpiece, a book so vast that it feels less like a novel and more like a continent with its own weather, its own storms, and its own stubborn sunrises. Hugo published it in 1862 after years of exile, political battles, and personal reinvention. By then, he was already the towering voice of French literature, the author of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, a poet celebrated across Europe, a statesman who championed the poor and fought against the death penalty, and a public figure whose writing could start arguments in Parliament and tears in the street. Les Misérables did not win a single award in the modern sense, because awards as we know them barely existed. Instead, it received something rarer. It became a sensation across continents the moment it was released, sold out printing runs across Europe, and was described by newspapers as a book that made readers crowd outside bookshops at dawn. There is a moment early in the novel when the bishop says to Jean Valjean, "I have bought your soul. I withdraw it from dark thoughts and the spirit of perdition, and I give it to God." This line has echoed for over a century because it is not just a blessing, but a challenge. What do we give one another? What can a single moment of grace do? Before we begin our journey through this extraordinary novel, if you enjoy deep dives and literary storytelling, feel free to like the video or subscribe to Echoes of Books. If you want to support the channel's long-form essays, donations or shares are always appreciated. Imagine Paris in the 19th century. Not the postcard Paris with soft lights and quiet bridges, but a restless city of shadows and smoke and sudden bursts of music from taverns where everyone is a little hungry and a little angry. Into this world walks a man with a shaved head, a yellow passport, and a stare that has forgotten how to hope. Jean Valjean is fresh out of prison after 19 years for stealing a loaf of bread and trying to escape again and again. He's a man who has been punished past the point where punishment makes sense. When he reaches a village, doors slam, faces turn away, even the dogs bark at him. He is not a person anymore. He is a warning. And then he meets a bishop, a gentle old man with silver hair and an almost foolish faith in goodness. When Valjean steals his silver and tries to flee, the bishop does something that feels more powerful than violence. He tells the police that the silver was a gift. In that simple lie, he reminds Valjean that he is still human. The bishop adds 2 candlesticks and whispers that he has bought Valjean's soul for something better than bitterness. It is one of those moments that literature gives us to prove that one person's kindness can rearrange the entire map of someone else's life. Valjean disappears from the scene and reappears years later transformed. He is now Monsieur Madeleine, the quiet mayor of a small town, respected by everyone and always ready to help someone in trouble. You can feel the tension under this peaceful disguise, though. Somewhere in the distance, a pair of boots is marching steadily closer. Those boots belong to Inspector Javert, a man whose spine is so straight that even his shadow looks disciplined. Javert believes that the law is the only truth and that a criminal can never change. For him, Valjean is not a man. He is a category. While Valjean is trying to keep his life from unraveling, another tragedy blooms in the same town. Fantine, a young woman with soft features and shy pride, is abandoned by a lover and forced to send her little daughter, Cosette, to live with an innkeeping couple who promise care but deliver cruelty. The Thénardiers, a husband and wife who can smile while they count the coins they squeezed from suffering, make Cosette work like a servant. Fantine believes her child is being treated well and works herself to exhaustion in order to send money. When gossip ruins her reputation, she loses her job and tumbles into poverty with terrifying speed. By the time Valjean discovers her situation, Fantine is sick and fragile, holding on to her life with the fragile hope that she will see her daughter again. Valjean vows to rescue Cosette. After Fantine dies, he keeps his promise. One cold night, he finds Cosette carrying a bucket of water almost as big as she is, her hands trembling from fear and cold. Without asking permission, he takes her away, and for the first time, Cosette experiences warmth that is not from a fire, but from another human being. Their escape is tense because Javert is closing in, and the chase ends with Valjean hiding in a convent where he and Cosette spend years living in peace. She grows into a gentle young woman, quiet and observant, with a softness that makes her seem like she has stepped out of another world. But peace cannot last forever in a city like Paris. When Cosette and Valjean move to the capital, the great machine of history begins to turn again. Paris is loud with political debates. Students gather in crowded cafes to argue about justice while the government tightens its grip. Among these students is Marius Pontmercy, an idealistic young man with a heart that jumps too quickly. One day, he sees Cosette in a garden and falls in love with the kind of intensity that only happens in novels and in youth. Cosette feels the same pull. Their love is shy at first, then urgent, and it sparks in both of them a feeling that life might hold something more than survival. Marius is close to a group called the Friends of the ABC, passionate young revolutionaries who believe they can drag the world towards something better. When the political situation becomes explosive, they build barricades in the streets. These barricades are not just piles of furniture. They are declarations. They are dreams made into wooden walls. Marius joins them, torn between love for Cosette and loyalty to his friends. What he does not know is that Valjean has discovered his involvement and follows him, not to stop him, but to protect the young man that Cosette loves. The battle is violent and heartbreaking. Idealism meets the hard edge of reality. The students fight with desperate bravery, singing and shouting, refusing to surrender even when they know they will die. In the chaos, Valjean saves Marius by carrying him through the sewers of Paris, a nightmarish journey through darkness that becomes a strange form of baptism. The turning point for Javert comes not from the barricades, but from Valjean's mercy. Valjean spares his life despite everything. Faced with a kindness he cannot reconcile with his worldview, Javert walks into the river and ends the conflict inside him. When the dust settles, Marius and Cosette marry. They build a gentle life together, one filled with sunlight and quiet mornings. But behind that happiness stands Valjean, fading like a candle burned down to the end. He distances himself because he believes his past will stain their future. When Marius discovers the truth, he rushes to Valjean's side, but the old man is already leaving the world with peace in his eyes. His last thoughts are of the bishop's kindness and the girl he saved from the dark. Structure is emotional architecture. The first thing you notice when you read Les Misérables is that it does not move like other novels. It breathes. It expands. It contracts. It holds your hand for a moment of quiet reflection. And then just when you are settling in, it pulls you into a storm. Victor Hugo does not write chapters so much as tides. He wants the reader to feel the rhythm of life itself. Sometimes messy, sometimes overwhelming, sometimes so still that you can hear your own heartbeat echoing in the silence between sentences. Hugo once said in a letter that he wanted to write a book that contained everything. Not just a plot, but history and poetry and politics and philosophy, and even the sound of Parisian footsteps on cobblestone streets. This ambition shapes the entire structure of the novel. It is built as a sequence of emotional movements, each with its own temperature. When the story enters the life of the bishop, it slows down and becomes almost meditative. The sentences stretch. The scenes linger. The air grows softer. It feels like Hugo has wrapped the story in a warm cloak so that Valjean can receive the bishop's light in full clarity. These chapters are calm not because nothing happens, but because the emotional transformation inside Valjean needs stillness to unfold. The moment the bishop tells him that his soul is now claimed for good, the world as Valjean knows it tilts. You can feel Hugo gently holding that moment in place like someone protecting a candle from the wind. But when the narrative shifts to Fantine and later to the political underground of Paris, the pace tightens sharply. Suddenly the chapters become shorter, the transitions quicker, the tension rising almost invisibly. Fantine's descent is not written as a single tragic fall. It is a staircase that creaks under her feet with every step. Her story moves faster because her life is shrinking. Every door closes with a kind of cold efficiency. The structure here is not accidental. Hugo wants the reader to experience what it feels like to have choice slowly stripped away until only survival remains. Then, as if the story itself needs to recover, Hugo leads us into the quiet world of the convent. Time slows again. Cosette grows. Valjean heals. Years pass behind the safety of walls. It is a gentle, almost monochrome section, a place where trauma breathes out. Hugo's structural intuition here is remarkable. He understands that an epic cannot be all fire. It also needs water. It needs silence. And even if the reader does not consciously track it, that shift in rhythm creates emotional depth. The convent chapters are the story's winter. Necessary, restful, a place where seeds wait under the snow. When the narrative re-enters Paris, the rhythm changes yet again. The city feels alive with noise and debate. Speeches bounce off the cafe walls. Political pamphlets circulate. Students argue with the kind of passion that makes youth feel indestructible. Hugo's structure becomes more fragmented here. It mirrors the instability of the political moment. The story jumps between Marius's love for Cosette and the revolutionary dreams of the Friends of the ABC. These shifts create an emotional double exposure: love layered over rebellion, hope layered over impending tragedy. You begin to feel that everything is accelerating toward an invisible line, and then the barricades rise. The barricade chapters are written like a drumbeat. Fast, urgent, raw. The sentences hit harder. The world shrinks to a single street where young men who still smell of ink and idealism face cannons and death. Hugo switches between panoramic views of Paris and close shots of individual faces. This expansion and contraction gives the battle a cinematic intensity. It becomes both intimate and universal. The structure here feels like a living thing, pushing the reader through chaos with the same uneven breaths that the characters are taking behind those makeshift walls. After the barricades fall, the story breaks open again. The pace slows. Paris is exhausted. Valjean and Marius walk through the sewers, and suddenly the narrative becomes heavy, almost suffocating. The structure turns inward. It forces the reader to follow a moral descent before allowing a return to the surface. Hugo knew exactly what he was doing. That tunnel is not just a place. It is a long symbolic sentence about redemption and the price of mercy. And then, at the end, the tone becomes almost whisper-like. Valjean's final chapters feel as if the novel is exhaling. Hugo returns to long, gentle sentences. The world quiets around Valjean. The pacing becomes careful, respectful, solemn. It feels like the novel is dimming the lights for a final farewell. What makes Hugo's structure so powerful is that it guides not only the plot, but the reader's emotional pulse. He builds tension by letting the world constrict. He creates relief by opening space. He knows when to linger and when to move, when to whisper and when to shout. This is not simply storytelling. It is choreography. The emotional architecture of Les Misérables is therefore not a byproduct. It is the hidden engine that keeps the novel alive. Readers may not consciously notice how the pacing shifts, but they feel it. And that feeling is part of the magic. It is what makes this enormous story, with its revolutions and escapes and secret identities, feel profoundly human. It moves like life moves, unevenly, beautifully. and always towards some fragile form of light. Style and voice. Hugo as a storyteller prophet. When you read Les Misérables out loud, even for a few lines, something unusual happens. The voice on the page feels bigger than the story it is telling. It feels like someone is leaning across the table, lowering their voice, and saying, "Listen, I am about to tell you the truth about the world. Not just a story, the truth." Victor Hugo writes the way a cathedral sounds. There is echo. There is height. There is a kind of architectural certainty in every sentence, as if he is constructing a moral universe brick by brick and wants to make sure you can feel the weight of every stone. Hugo's style is famous for being excessive. He uses long sentences that twist and bloom and fold back on themselves. He loves metaphors that stretch across half a page. His narrator is not shy. He interrupts the plot to explain the philosophy of punishment. He pauses a tense chase scene because he suddenly wants to talk about the history of Parisian slang. Most writers would be terrified to try this, but Hugo does it with the confidence of someone who knows exactly how much space he needs. He believes that the world he is building must include its own commentary, its own footnotes, its own thunder and rain. He is not writing a story. He is writing a cosmos. Take his description of the night in which Valjean and Cosette escape from the Thénardiers. The prose grows dark and cold. The path becomes almost mythical. Hugo writes night was everywhere, and fear was everywhere, and Cosette felt that the man holding her hand was the whole world. That line is simple, but its simplicity carries the weight of myth. Cosette is a small child holding the hand of someone she barely knows, yet Hugo gives the moment the gravity of an origin story. The narrative voice is constantly lifting ordinary moments into the realm of the symbolic. In his hands, a street is never just a street. A candle is never just a candle. A shadow is never just a shadow. Everything glows a little. What makes Hugo's style so interesting is that he uses grandeur not as decoration, but as a form of moral persuasion. The narrator tells you what to feel not because Hugo doubts your intelligence, but because he believes that certain truths deserve to be shouted from the rooftops. When he writes about poverty, he refuses to be subtle. He wants you to feel horrified. When he writes about mercy, he refuses to be restrained. He wants you to feel uplifted. And when he writes about injustice, he brings the full force of his rhetorical power down on the reader. Critics sometimes complain that he moralizes, but Hugo is not moralizing. He is testifying. There is also humor in his voice, the kind of humor that comes from a person who has seen everything, suffered through politics, witnessed revolutions, and still believes the world is worth saving. He loves to make small jokes at the expense of arrogant characters. He jokes about Marius's hopeless romanticism. He laughs gently at Cosette's innocence. He even pokes fun at his own digressions. When he pauses to talk about the Battle of Waterloo, he knows perfectly well that half the readers want the plot to continue. So he writes with a wink, as if saying, "This will matter. Trust me." And by the end, it does. One of the most important features of Hugo's style is the narrator's godlike perspective. The narrator sees everything. He knows what each character fears, what they dream of, how they breathe. He also knows what the city is thinking. The narrator is never wrong, never hesitant, never small. This gives the story a sense of destiny. Even when characters do not understand what is happening, the narrator does. And because the narrator is wise and compassionate, the reader feels safe in his hands. It is like being guided through a storm by someone holding a lantern. There is a subtle political power in this narrative stance as well. Hugo turns the poor into epic protagonists. He gives them the kind of language that Parisian society never gave them in real life. When he describes the working class, he uses the same lofty voice he uses for kings and heroes. He writes sentences like, "The miserable are the great teachers of the comfortable." It is not just a comment. It is a rebalancing of who gets to be central in a story. Through his style, Hugo redistributes narrative power. The characters who are ignored by society are granted dignity on the page. They are given the voice that history denied them. This is part of what makes the novel so emotionally overwhelming. You feel like you are witnessing justice enacted through language itself. Another crucial element is how Hugo uses repetition and echo. He returns to certain words like shadows and light and grace and misery. They become motifs that follow the reader from chapter to chapter. When Valjean first looks at the bishop's candlesticks, the narrative bathes them in symbolic radiance. Many chapters later, when Valjean looks at them again on his deathbed, the repetition strikes like a bell. Hugo is playing with emotional memory, letting themes circle back until they feel inevitable. The voice becomes a kind of musical instrument, weaving threads across hundreds of pages. Even when the story is chaotic, the voice keeps its calm authority. During the barricade scenes, with cannons shaking the street and smoke filling the air, the narrator sometimes pauses to speak softly about courage or the fragility of youth. These moments feel like the voice of someone older, someone who has lived long enough to know that bravery and tragedy often sleep in the same bed. The calmness gives the chaos meaning. It turns noise into narrative. This is why the reader never gets lost. The narrator is always holding the thread. All of this together creates a unique reading experience. Hugo's voice is not neutral. It has an agenda. It wants you to care. It wants you to believe that mercy is stronger than law, that kindness can rewrite fate, that the poor are not accidents but victims of a broken structure, and that every human soul deserves a second chance. His voice insists that literature is not entertainment but moral testimony. And yet it never feels preachy because the passion is so sincere. He believes what he says with the intensity of someone who has wrestled with despair and come out on the other side carrying a candle. This is why readers still respond to the book after more than a century. The voice is alive. It speaks directly, without hesitation, with warmth and thunder in the same breath. It is the voice of a storyteller prophet, someone who wants to shake the world awake. The philosophy of mercy, Valjean and Javert. If the heart of Les Misérables could be distilled into a single question, it might be this one. What does a human being become when the world shows them mercy? Victor Hugo treats mercy not as politeness or softness, but as a force powerful enough to tilt the axis of a life. In the universe of the novel, mercy is disruptive. It interrupts fate. It defies logic. It breaks the machinery of punishment and replaces it with something frighteningly human. And no two characters embody this clash more vividly than Jean Valjean and Inspector Javert. To understand the philosophy of mercy in this story, we have to start with the moment when Valjean's soul is cracked open. After years of imprisonment that have carved bitterness into his bones, he steals the bishop's silver and expects nothing but condemnation. Instead, the bishop looks at him with a calm that Valjean does not yet know how to believe. The bishop says, "Do not forget, never forget, that you have promised to use this silver in becoming an honest man." Valjean has made no such promise. The bishop invents the promise for him. Mercy, in this scene, is not forgiveness. It is redefinition. It gives Valjean a new identity before he even knows who that person is. This moment is the philosophical cornerstone of the novel. Hugo is telling us that identity is not fixed. It is not handed down by law. It is not carved into the skin by past mistakes. Identity, for Hugo, is changeable the moment someone believes you can be more than what you were. The bishop's mercy does not ignore Valjean's crime. It transforms it. It takes the ugliest moment in Valjean's life and turns it into the seed of his rebirth. When Valjean walks out of that house, he is not healed. He is fractured. He spends a night wrestling with his rage and his shame, a night that feels like an entire lifetime compressed into a few pages. But he comes out of it new. The first philosophical truth emerges. Mercy is not gentle, it is violent. It shatters old selves so that something better can take their place. Javert, by contrast, is the embodiment of a world without mercy. He's not evil. This is important. Hugo did not write him as a villain. Javert is a man who has built his entire existence on the belief that rules are sacred because rules protect society from chaos. For him, a human being is either lawful or lawless, saved or damned, upright or crooked. There is no middle space. Javert's worldview comes from his own past. Born in a prison to a fortune teller and a convict, he grows up believing that the only escape from misery is obedience. He chooses the side of the law with a ferocity that is almost religious. When Javert says, "I am the law," he means it. He has given up his personal identity. He has turned himself into an instrument. This is what makes the encounter between Valjean and Javert so philosophically rich. They are not simply hunter and hunted. They are two visions of what humans can be. Valjean believes that a person can change, that compassion is stronger than past mistakes. Javert believes that change is impossible and that compassion is corruption disguised as kindness. When Javert hunts Valjean, he is not chasing a man. He's chasing a contradiction. If Valjean can change, then everything Javert believes collapses. The confrontation at the barricades is Hugo's most brilliant ethical trap. Valjean has the chance to kill Javert, the man who has chased him across decades. Instead, he cuts the ropes, frees him, and tells him to leave. It is not just mercy. It is mercy delivered at the moment Javert least expects it. This act strikes Javert harder than any bullet could. He walks away stunned, repeating the words of Valjean in disbelief. "Go. You are free." These words feel like a hallucination to a man who has built his entire life on rigid moral geometry. Javert's crisis is not emotional. It is philosophical. He cannot understand the logic of mercy. If the law says a criminal must be punished, and the criminal acts with grace instead of brutality, then the law itself is flawed. If the law is flawed, then Javert has devoted his life to an illusion. Hugo writes that Javert felt shattered in conscience. His thought could not escape the contradiction. His inner world is collapsing in real time. He is a man standing on a bridge that suddenly becomes air. This is why mercy destroys Javert. It reveals the gap between justice and humanity. Javert cannot live in that gap. He steps into the river because he cannot rebuild himself the way Valjean did. His identity is rigid. Mercy demands flexibility. Valjean was broken open by kindness and rebuilt from the pieces. Javert simply breaks. This philosophical contrast is what gives the novel its enormous emotional power. Mercy is shown not as a sentimental gesture, but as a radical form of resistance. When Valjean lifts a cart to save someone, or carries Marius through the sewers or spares Javert, he is performing acts that defy the logic of the world around him. The law says he should be punished. Society says he should remain what he once was. And yet every time he chooses mercy, he pushes back against that verdict. He creates a small revolution inside himself and inside the people who witness him. Hugo suggests that mercy is the one force strong enough to challenge structures of injustice, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to be defined by it. This is why Valjean remains one of the most powerful characters in literature. He is a man who was broken, reshaped, chased, wounded, and scarred, but who kept offering compassion even when the world gave him every reason to become brutal. The philosophy of the novel is simple and radical. People do not become good because they are told to. They become good because someone believes they can be. That belief is the spark. Everything else grows from it. Hugo gives us two men to show the stakes. One chooses to live in the space mercy opens. The other cannot survive in it. Between them lies the question that still haunts readers today. What kind of world do we create when we choose mercy over judgment? And what kind of world do we destroy when we refuse? Social justice and systemic violence. Whenever people talk about Les Misérables, they talk about the big themes first: redemption, love, sacrifice. But beneath all the poetry and the barricades and the sweeping emotions, there is something sharper running through the novel, a blade pressed quietly against the throat of society. Victor Hugo wrote this book not just to tell a story, but to expose the machinery of misery, the gears and levers that grind ordinary people down. He wanted his readers to see, with painful clarity, how suffering is not an accident. It is designed, it is inherited, it is distributed by the invisible hands of politics, poverty, and power. This section of the novel often feels so modern that it startles you. Hugo was not using the vocabulary of social justice that we use today, but the instincts are all there. He understood that Fantine did not fall because she was weak or foolish. She fell because a society with rigid class structures and merciless gender expectations left her no space to stand. One broken promise, one sickening abandonment, one moment of poverty, and every institution designed to protect people suddenly became a trapdoor beneath her feet. Hugo describes Fantine's decline with devastating simplicity. She had become a thing in the eyes of the world, not a person, a thing. That line is one of the most brutally honest observations in the novel. Fantine does not lose her dignity. Society strips it from her one layer at a time. Her employer fires her to avoid scandal. The police arrest her for defending herself. Even her illness becomes a spectacle for others to judge, rather than a suffering to relieve. When Valjean lifts her up and calls her Madame, she weeps because it has been so long since anyone treated her like a human being. Hugo wants readers to feel that distance, to see how people can be turned into shadows in plain sight. And then there is Cosette, who becomes another symbol of structural cruelty. She is a child doing the labor of an adult, forced to serve customers with her small, trembling hands, while the Thénardiers enjoy the profits. The Thénardiers are almost exaggerated in their greed and violence, but Hugo understood that they were exaggerations of real social dynamics. Children in poor families were often treated as tools. They were used, traded, borrowed, or abandoned. Cosette becomes a mirror that reflects what happens when a society values money more than care. The horror is not that the Thénardiers mistreat her. The horror is that no one intervenes. Everyone sees. No one acts. The novel becomes even more political when it moves into the streets of Paris. Hugo takes us into crowded neighborhoods, into wine shops humming with tension, into back alleys where whispers of revolution pass like sparks. The students who call themselves the Friends of the ABC are not naive dreamers in the way critics sometimes paint them. They are young men who understand that injustice is not simply personal. It is systemic. They see the government tightening its grip and the poor sinking deeper. They know that charity is not enough. They believe change requires noise. It requires bodies. It requires revolution. Hugo gives them a moment of glory on the barricades. Their barricade is a pile of furniture and barrels and stones, held together by hope and stubbornness. But it becomes more than a defense. It becomes a symbol. It is the physical manifestation of a question. What if the poor had a voice loud enough to overturn the world? Their fight is hopeless, and Hugo knows it. But he gives them dignity by showing that their deaths are not pointless. They die not for victory, but for the idea that the world does not have to be this way. Society does not crumble because they fail. It crumbles because it refuses to listen. One of the most fascinating parts of Hugo's analysis is the way he portrays the police. The police are not individually evil, but they serve a system that prioritizes order over justice. Javert himself is the perfect example. He believes he is protecting society by pursuing Valjean. His devotion is real. His logic is flawless. But the world he protects is flawed. Hugo asks us to consider what happens when morality and legality drift apart, when the law becomes a shield for cruelty, when obedience becomes a weapon. Hugo also gives us one of the most powerful symbols of systemic violence in the novel: the sewers. Readers often remember the sewer scenes as dark and disgusting, but they forget the symbolism. The sewers are the underside of Paris. Everything the city wants to hide ends up there. Waste, secrets, corpses. It is a literal underworld where the refuse of society flows endlessly. When Valjean carries Marius through that suffocating darkness, he is carrying the next generation through the hidden consequences of their society's failures. Hugo shows that progress requires crossing through the filth produced by injustice. There is a telling moment when he writes, "The sewer is the conscience of the city." It is one of Hugo's most daring metaphors. It suggests that a city's moral truth is revealed not in its grand boulevards or polished monuments, but in the places it hides from view. The novel insists that until a society confronts what it throws away, it cannot heal. This theme still resonates today because the structures that produced Fantine's poverty and Cosette's suffering and the students' rebellion have not disappeared. They have only evolved. What makes Hugo's critique so enduring is that he refuses to separate the personal from the political. Every tragedy in the novel has a social root. Every injustice has a human face. Hugo did not want readers to simply feel sorrow. He wanted them to feel anger, a quiet anger, the kind that whispers, "This should not happen," not in fiction, not in life. Les Misérables is ultimately not a story about individual failures. It is a story about the weight of systems pressing down on ordinary people until they break or bend or rise. It is a reminder that misery is a product of human design, and that justice requires more than kindness. It requires change. Hugo believed that the greatest crime of any society is to accept suffering as normal. His novel is an attempt to wake the world from that numbness. Women of Les Misérables: love, silence, and suffering. The women of Les Misérables walk through the story like notes in a sad melody. Their presence is soft but unforgettable, and their suffering is written with such clarity that you can sometimes feel it settling in your chest. Victor Hugo understood women in a complicated way. He saw their vulnerability with a piercing eye. He wrote their tragedies with genuine compassion, but he also placed them inside a world that rarely allows them to speak for themselves. They are remembered for the shape of their pain more than for the force of their voices. This tension is part of what makes them so haunting and so necessary to the novel's emotional power. Let us start with Fantine. She is perhaps the most iconic symbol of female suffering in the novel, known for her tragic descent from factory worker to street wanderer. But what people often forget is how vividly Hugo roots her downfall in the gender norms of her time. Fantine is abandoned by a wealthy man who walks away untouched by consequence, while society judges her so harshly that even her silence becomes incriminating. She hides the existence of her child because she understands the cold arithmetic of reputation. A single mother in 19th century France was not just vulnerable, she was doomed. Hugo writes, "She was modest even in her shame." It is a line that reveals both tenderness and blindness. Fantine's purity is framed as something she carries, even when she is punished for things beyond her control. But purity should not be the measure of whether a woman deserves compassion. Fantine does not fall because she fails morally. She falls because the world is designed to let women fall quietly and without defense. Fantine's transformation is painful to read. She sells her hair. She sells her teeth. She sells her body. But the most heartbreaking thing she ever sells is her faith that the world will protect her child. When Valjean speaks to her gently, she breaks down not because he promises help, but because he simply calls her a woman, not a sinner or a disgrace. That simple recognition is the first kindness she has received in months. Fantine's story is not just personal tragedy. It is the illustration of a system that weaponizes morality against women while excusing men for the same acts. Cosette, by contrast, is often criticized for being a passive character, a girl who moves from suffering to safety without ever taking control of her life. But that criticism misses something delicate and important. Cosette is written not as an action heroine, but as a survivor. A child who has spent years in darkness does not become outspoken overnight. Trauma rewires the voice. Cosette's silence is not emptiness. It is the echo of fear. When she grows older, that silence transforms into a gentle reserve, a softness that is not weakness, but a form of emotional self-preservation. Hugo writes about Cosette as if she is both real and mythic. She has the quiet grace of a figure in a painting, touched by light but never fully at rest. Although she becomes a symbol of hope and rebirth, it is important to remember that she never truly gains independence. She moves from the authority of the Thénardiers to the protection of Valjean to the arms of Marius. Each transition is an improvement, but each still places her within the care or control of someone else. Cosette's life is shaped by love, but rarely by choice. Then there is Eponine, perhaps the most modern of Hugo's female characters. She begins as a child raised in cruelty, fed on lies and neglect, and shaped by parents who teach her that survival requires cunning. As she grows older, Eponine becomes street-smart and fiercely independent in ways Cosette could never be. She knows the language of the streets, the codes of the night, and the sharp edges of desire. She's in love with Marius with a depth that startles even her. She describes her love as something that hurts, something that fills her with both hope and despair. In one of the most unforgettable lines, she says, "I was a little afraid you would not come," and her voice trembles with a truth Cosette's softness cannot express. Eponine is the woman who loves without expectation. She is willing to walk barefoot in the rain to deliver a letter. She is willing to die with a bullet in her chest just to see Marius smile at her once. She is a character who refuses to fit neatly into archetypes. She is neither saint nor sinner. She is simply human. And Hugo gives her one moment of quiet triumph when she smiles as she dies, grateful for even the smallest trace of affection. It is a devastating scene because it reveals a truth that still feels relevant today. Some people spend their entire lives loving more deeply than they will ever be loved in return. There are also smaller figures scattered throughout the novel. Women who appear for a moment but carry immense symbolic weight. Marius's grandmother who clings to propriety with icy precision. The nuns at the convent who represent a world where women can survive only by renouncing their identities. Little Gavroche's anonymous sisters, living in poverty so deep that even the narrator admits he cannot save them. These fleeting presences remind us that the world of Les Misérables is full of women who are unnamed, unseen, and unprotected. Hugo's portrayal of women is therefore layered and contradictory. He elevates them with poetic reverence, but also confines them to roles defined by suffering. He sees their humanity clearly, yet sometimes romanticizes their pain. Modern readers often ask whether Hugo empowers women or silences them. The answer is both. His compassion is sincere, but his imagination is limited by the gender norms of his era. Fantine, Cosette, and Eponine are not allowed to fully escape their assigned narratives. But within those narratives, they shine with a fierce emotional truth. This complexity makes the women of Les Misérables essential to any deep reading of the book. They reveal not just the cruelty of society, but the limits of the storyteller himself. They invite us to question who gets to be a hero and who is allowed to speak. They also remind us that literature, like society, grows over time. Future retellings and adaptations have done what Hugo could not. They have given these women fuller voices, richer desires, and greater agency. But the tenderness and tragedy of their original portrayal still linger like a soft ache. Reception and adaptation, how the world talks back. Every great book begins as a private conversation between writer and page, but once it enters the world, it becomes something else. It becomes a chorus, a quarrel, a mirror for every generation that touches it. Les Misérables is one of those rare novels that has never stopped being argued over. It has been adored, mocked, worshipped, dismissed, rediscovered, reinvented, and sometimes even misunderstood so loudly that the misunderstanding becomes part of its legend. To study its reception is to witness how a book can grow larger than itself. When Les Misérables was first published in 1862, readers lined up outside bookshops the way people queue today for movie premieres. Some stores opened at dawn because the crowds were too impatient to wait. The novel spread across Europe like a fever. In Portugal, it sold out immediately. In Russia, copies circulated secretly. In France, students read it out loud in cafes. Families saved money to buy the installments. It was a phenomenon of pure emotion. People felt that Hugo had written a book that reached into the soil of humanity and pulled out something raw and shining. But critics were not so generous. Many of Hugo's literary contemporaries despised the book. They complained that his prose was too sentimental, too dramatic, too excessive, too messy. They rolled their eyes at his digressions. They mocked his moralizing tone. Some accused him of writing political propaganda disguised as fiction. Others argued that he treated poverty with a romantic glow instead of realism. A few even suggested that Hugo was trying to manipulate readers into crying and called the book theatrical in the worst sense of the word. This resistance tells us something important. Hugo was doing something new. He was writing a novel that refused to choose between art and politics, between poetry and documentation, between intimate drama and public history. It confused the critics because it did not obey the rules. Readers embraced it because it did not need to. With time, the novel's reputation evolved. In the early 20th century, some scholars treated it as an overlong sentimental relic. But in the mid to late 20th century, something shifted. Academics began to appreciate the structural daring of the book, the philosophical depth, the sociological insight. Historians started using it to understand 19th century France. Literary critics reclassified it as one of the foundational texts of the modern social novel. The pendulum swung again. The book became respectable, even towering. Then came the musical. If the novel created a literary movement, the musical created a cultural one. Les Misérables, the stage production, became its own universe. It simplified the political arguments, focused heavily on the emotional arcs, and turned certain scenes into iconic moments set to music. Suddenly, Valjean's soliloquy was echoing in theaters around the world. Javert's Crisis was sung from balconies, and Eponine's Heartbreak became an anthem. The musical distilled Hugo's vast world into a tightly woven emotional opera. Some critics argued that it softened the politics too much. Others argued that it amplified the humanity beautifully. Either way, the musical ensured that the story reached millions who had never touched the book. The impact did not stop there. Film adaptations poured in across the decades. Silent films, black and white classics, sprawling mini-series, and modern blockbusters each emphasized different aspects of the story. The 1935 version leaned into drama. The 1998 film focused on the psychological cat and mouse between Valjean and Javert. The 2012 musical film leaned into trauma, breathlessness, and emotional immediacy. With every adaptation, Hugo's world rearranged itself slightly, as if the story were a living organism growing new limbs in each era. Readers and viewers today are just as divided as audiences in Hugo's time. On social media, you see comments like, "I loved the characters, but the digressions nearly killed me." Others say the digressions are the whole point. And then there are the romantics who whisper that the book changed their lives, that they cried when Valjean died, even though they knew it was coming. Some readers find Cosette too quiet. Others fall in love with her innocence. Some adore Eponine for her fire. Others think she has overshadowed the original text. On book forums, there are long threads debating whether Javert is a villain, a tragic hero, or a man simply trapped in his own worldview. There is also a growing movement of feminist and Marxist readings of the book. Feminist readers argue that the women in the novel deserve more agency than Hugo gives them. Marxist critics point out that the novel highlights class struggle, but ultimately resolves it through individual morality rather than systemic revolution. Modern philosophers find existential threads in Valjean's self-reinvention, while sociologists treat Hugo as an early analyst of urban poverty. The book has become a playground for interpretation. It invites disagreement because it contains multitudes. What makes Les Misérables so fascinating is that every generation reads it differently. The 19th century saw it as a political warning. The mid-20th century saw it as a sentimental epic. The late 20th century embraced it as a revolutionary anthem of the oppressed. Today, many see it as a study of trauma, forgiveness, and the psychology of justice. A single book that can be all of these things is not just literature. It is a living argument with time itself. And this is why reception matters, because the story does not stay the same. Its meaning shifts depending on who is holding it. A revolutionary sees a call to barricades. A mother sees Fantine's desperation. A student sees Marius's idealism. Someone who has been broken sees Valjean's rebirth. Someone who has lived by the rules sees Javert's collapse. Every reader adds another thread to the tapestry. The novel keeps expanding because humanity keeps changing. This ongoing conversation is part of what makes the book so powerful. Hugo may have written the words, but the world has been rewriting their meaning for over a century. Every argument in every adaptation, every teary comment on a forum, every criticism that calls it melodramatic, every praise that calls it transcendent, all of it is proof that the story is alive. There is a moment near the end of Les Misérables when Jean Valjean, old and fading, looks once more at the bishop's silver candlesticks. They glow softly in the dark, just as they did the night he was forgiven for the first time. It is a simple moment, almost quiet enough to miss, but it carries the entire soul of the novel. Hugo writes, the light he saw came from his own heart. After everything he has endured, Valjean realizes that the kindness once offered to him became the kindness he carried into the world. It is the light that moved from hand to hand, from the bishop to Valjean, from Valjean to Cosette, from Cosette to Marius, and from the story to us. Les Misérables does not promise that the world is fair. It does not claim that justice always triumphs. Instead, it tells us something more honest and more hopeful, that mercy is revolutionary, that compassion is contagious, that loving another human being can be a political act, a spiritual act, a defiant act. It tells us that the people society calls unworthy may be the ones carrying the future inside them. And it reminds us that no one is too broken to be transformed, not even a man who once believed he was beyond salvation. We have walked through the structure of the novel, its swirling architecture of emotion. We have listened to Hugo's voice, thunderous and tender. We have traced the philosophical duel between Valjean and Javert, explored the weight of systems that crush the poor, and listened to the women who suffer and survive in a world that rarely listens back. We have watched the book's journey through history, the way each generation has reshaped it, challenged it, embraced it. And after all this, the story still feels alive, restless, full of unfinished questions, which leaves us with one more. A question I hope you'll carry with you long after the video ends. If you were in Valjean's place, faced with someone who wronged you, hunted you, doubted your humanity, would you be able to do what he did and offer mercy instead of vengeance? Or would you, like Javert, struggle to believe that compassion can coexist with justice? It is a question without a perfect answer. And that, perhaps, is why the novel continues to speak to us. Because it asks us to choose what kind of world we want to build every single day. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more conversations like this, you can like the video or subscribe to Echoes of Books. It helps this little corner of the internet grow. And if you want to support future long-form essays, sharing the video or sending a small donation is always appreciated. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, keep reading bravely and loving loudly.